This is typical Philidor position with bishop on. Prerequisite for Philidor position is weaker side king covers the square where the pawn can come out. So here on f8. Also, stronger side king is not on 6th rank, but for example on 5th rank. So here this constitutes Philidor position, which is usually a draw. However, sometimes it can be a win for the stronger side, which exists more likely when pawn is on a center fire, so E or D fire, instead of bishop fire, rook fire, knight fire. So here, in this particular case, it's a win for right or a draw, depending on whose turn it is to move. If it were right to move, right would win. However, I set it to back to move, so it is a draw. In order to draw this position, it helps to understand basics of panning in chess. Well, there are two meta pans. These are progress on your stronger side, or restrict the opponent's stronger side. So here, weaker side is by definition weak because the other side has a pawn extra for no compensation. Therefore, the only strategy here is to restrict the strong side, and that is the king side. Therefore, the best move in this position is going to be rook b6, cutting the king off of the 6th rank by restricting f6 and g6 squares. Now, White can try several different options, but backdoors in all variations. By the way, the move, for example, rook b1 would also be a draw, but a much harder way to draw the position. This is much riskier. I will go back to it in a few minutes or so, but let's just talk about rook b6. So rook b6 stops a king penetration, so the only progressive move he can try is f6. However, after f6, the king loses shelter. Here is a general rule. Put the rook on a square where it has two checking options, and then you can see that the king has no shelter. Here, that move would be rook b1. Rook b1 is the best move because there are two checking options. There's b5 and g1. And we want to choose g1. We don't want to play g5. Don't play rook b5, sorry, because of king g6. However, the fact that we have these two options communicates the information to us that the king has no shelter. So this is a draw because White cannot escape the checks. For example, let's just say king g6, threatening mate on c8. We just simply play rook g1, king has to move, king f5, rook f1, and king has to keep the pawn guarded, so king e6, for example, rook e1. If the king returns, then we just repeat rook f1. If the king tries to run away, like king d7, well then the move king f7 does also rook f1 should draw, and if the king tries to somehow chase the rook, like king d4, well, we just put the rook back, force the king to go back, and if he goes this way with f4, it's just the same. Rook f1. So this is a draw. Now, instead of f6, he can try something else like rook a7 just to pass a turn and invite back to make a mistake. However, black can do the same. Just make a waiting move. Just pass a turn, sit on the 6th rank, and white cannot progress. If something like rook b7, just rook a6. Rook c7, I'm sure you could have guessed it, just rook b6 or rook d6. And it's a draw. Let's talk about rook b1 here. So rook b1 is still a draw, but it's much harder because of king g6, and black has to be very careful. I guess some grandmasters have failed to draw this position with the weaker side. But anyway, the simplest way to draw is rook f1. Even rook g1 is possible, actually. Rook g1 is possible. However, white can just cover his king, and you'll notice that there's 0 checks for black, right? Whereas from before, black had 2 options to check on b6 and g1, where rook f1 makes sense because there's still one checking option, right, where he can circumvent it by means of king f6, but then simply just king g8 is a draw. Not king e8, by the way. I would not play king a8 because the king is going towards the long side and it's very risky. Always move the king to the short side because rook has more checking space on the long side. Just something like rook c8, king d7, rook f8 is going to be winning for white. We can also discuss this position actually. So this is like the center position where black can just try something like rook f2, but then where king g7, yeah, this rook f8 covers the f pawn, and the weaker side's king is dislodged. That's right. This is a win for white. If rook g2, well, you might think it's a draw at first because the king cannot really hide. However, just simply king f7 and the center position will be reached. So, for example, just rook f2 will f6, rook f1 will just something like rook a8, and rook f2, king g7. And now, I guess that white can escape the check by means of king f8, right? Because rook is not attacking the pawn, and if he just goes back, then f7. And now white's strategy is very classical. It's just beating the bridge by putting the rook on the 4th rank and also making a check to gain some space for the stronger side's king. So, for example, just say rook g2, we're stopping king g7, right? Well, just rook a4, and rook g1, rook d4. Now the king has to move away from the fire, freeze the king to go to e8 or e7, right? And now the point is, with the rook placed on specifically 4th rank, white can actually shatter his king. So rook e1, king f6, rook f1, king e6, rook e1, king e5, sorry, king f5. There's no rook e8, right? And the king is cut off. So therefore, rook f1 is the only move, but then rook f4 is just blocking all the checks, and it's a win for white. can Black try anything else? I mean, so Rook F8, right? Let's see, what else can Black try? Maybe Rook H1 or something, but it's almost the same, just King G7, Rook G1, King F7. That's pretty much transposes if Rook H1 instead of Rook F1, just F6, and there's almost no difference because Rook H7, King G6, Rook H1 is just seen where just Rook A8, right? And then the king would go to F8, eventually push F7, and we're in this position, King G7, knight, where Rook G1, King F8, it's a scene. So I guess that Bear cannot really tie any other idea. It's all leading to the same. Beck has to play King G8. So the rule is put the king on the short side, and the short side is on the king side. So this is a draw, and what can white try? Well, for example, Rook C8, King H7. I mean, he can try the same idea with Rook F8 to kind of free the king to guard the pawn. But, okay, I mean, Bear can just simply play Rook A1 because it's the long side, and that's why we want the king on the short side, so that the rook can control the long side, because we need something to control the short side. The rook cannot do both. We need the king to control the short side, while rook controls long side, since rook is a long range piece. So Rook A1 is a normal move. Rook E8, and where he doesn't protect the F5 pawn with the rook, so rook back to F1, and he can try to protect it this way, but then King G8 is just a draw. So that's it. Okay. Let's talk about if it's white's move in this position. White is winning. How? Where? It's by means of King G6. Not F6 because of Rook B1, and as we said before, there are two checking options, so the white king has no sheta. So just Rook G1, just check from behind and draw. And King F6 doesn't work because of Rook B6. And the king has to go back, the king is cut off. That leaves King G6. White is winning because he would play F6 next, and sometimes Rook H7, Rook H8, or Rook H7, F7, Rook H8. So there's no defense for Beck. Beck can trace some different options like Rook C8 or Rook B1 or Rook B6. Well, let's first talk about Rook B1. Well, Beck doesn't have time for Rook B1 because of Rook A8 check, and it forces King E7, but King is going to be dislodged from the control of the F pawn, so it's no longer a Philidor position. So King E6, and white can just play Rook E8 to win. I guess also Rook A6 should win, but Rook E8 looks simplest because we support the F8 square for the pawn to promote. If King D7, F7, right? And Bear can try this idea, Rook G1, hoping for some tricks on the F file, but white can just simply stay on the H and G file, so he can just play King H5, King G4, King H3, and King G2. and you might notice black has run out of checks. Yeah, f8 cannot be stopped. So rook b1 doesn't work. What if rook b6? Well, rook b6, f6 obviously, threatening checkmate, so the rook has to go back. And this is called passive defense, by the way. This is like passive defense. It only works if the pawn is a knight pawn or a rook pawn, but this is a bishop pawn, so white is winning. He just simply plays rook h7, threatening rook h8, and that would be checkmate, but even if it were not checkmate, he would pick up the rook from behind. So the only tie is king g8, but then f7 is winning for white because of king f8, rook h8, and rook b8. There's no other defense because rook h7 just cannot be stopped. King g8 is the only way to delay rook h8, right? So rook b6 doesn't work. What if rook c8? Rook c8 is the probably best defense. So we go f6, and now black has one last tick, so he can play king g8, and this is very tricky because after rook h7, black can just play the move rook c6. Okay, white is still winning because he can return, and black has to go back, and we get the same position. But you can see white did not make progress. Now, if rook delivers check here, then king f8, not king h8, because king h8 is running into rook a7, and this should basically just win straight away for white because of rook c8, rook h7, king g8, f7, transposing to the same position area. So king f8 needs to be played, and then white makes no progress because rook h7, rook c8, right? But then again, this is just completely winning for white. So, as a matter of fact, the simplest way to win is just rook g7 checks straight away, because king f8, rook h7, or king h8, just rook h7 again, and f7. So, in conclusion, white wins by means of king g6. What else can be discussed about this position? Let me think, because I know that this position is classica. I guess that I don't know. I think that covers about everything. I hope this is helpful. Thank you.